Hello, people. Yes, it's me, Bill, on camera for the first time. Literally crazy, I know. But I wanted to come on really quick, not just to introduce myself visually, but to also talk about this series that we're doing called The New Essentials. Basically, throughout this series, we're going to be looking at albums, mixtapes, projects, what have you, from the SoundCloud rap, internet rap era that we consider to be classics. And we're kind of doing this because we don't really see a lot of people defining, what the most recent classic albums are in our genre right now. And we figured, it's 2020, we're moving on, we're kind of starting a new era, so why not reflect? And we're probably going to limit our selections from about 2010 to 2018-ish. We might throw some 2019 in there. I don't know, maybe. But anyways, this is basically just going to be a series where we recap the best of this internet rap era, if you want to call it that. And I know you're probably all saying, oh, well, what if these albums suck in a couple years? What if these aren't classics? Well, first of all, that's not going to happen, so shut up. And second, can we just all have some fun around here? Can we just all get along? We don't have to be all boomers. Come on. Anyways, so yeah, I just wanted to clear some of that stuff up before we jumped into things, but now I think it's about that time. Thanks for, looking at me for the first time. Anyways, let's get into it. "2017. What a time to be alive." Or was that 2015? I don't even... What a time to be alive as a fan of underground hip-hop. If we are to go along what has come to be the general consensus among music fans and critics alike, and are considering where we stand today in 2020 as the end of the, quote, SoundCloud era, then 2017 is absolutely the apex of this period. Is this era of hip-hop even over at this point? That is debatable, and though we might have a definitive answer to that question by the end of 2020, I still think we can consider the small pocket of time from about 2014 to 2019 as a specific era of underground hip-hop dominated by a particular sound, style, and ethos centered around a specific mindset and outlook shared by more than a few prominent artists. The rise of the SoundCloud platform brought with it the simultaneous rise of a scene all to its own, a scene that embodied those three facets in full, thanks to its cast of talent that pushed boundaries more than any other rising scene before or since in hip-hop. Beginning as a small pocket of independent music in the mid-2010s, with these 16 to 17-year-old rappers sitting in their rooms making music to simply get away from the troubles that they had been experiencing in their home lives, it slowly but surely grew in prominence within the underground landscape as people began to take notice of the raw and unfiltered energy that these acts were coming out with. Leading the way was the great state of Florida, more specifically those in the Broward County area, who essentially created a scene all to their own and did everything in their power to continue it as the decade progressed onward. Staying largely exclusive to those who were in the know on the internet or simply those locals, this scene's progressions eventually paid off in late 2016 as its polarizing leading star XXXTentacion finally broke through into the mainstream, while in jail, mind you, with his now iconic hit, Look at Me. The success of the single brought a substantial amount of exposure to not only X's solo career, but the careers of many of his contemporaries, most of which were associated with or were direct members of his members-only collective. And this brings us back to 2017, the biggest year for the collective as a whole, while they were all still together and all on good terms. With this sense of synergy came an equal amount of utility for the fans of the sound and scene alike. It's safe to say there was no better time to be a part of this audience than this year, but we say this now in hindsight, knowing what came next in the following years. 2018 might have been the most financially successful and simply notorious year in this era, but it didn't see the same amount of pure quality that longtime fans had experienced for what had been 3+ years up to that point. The all-too-sudden death of X did not help either, And though 2019 would see further exposure of this sound into the mainstream, things just did not feel the same. That is why it's so important to look back at 2017 with the greatest appreciation that we possibly can. People always bring up 2016 as such a perfect year not only for music, but just within the 2010s as a whole. And while yes, I'm people, 2017, at least from the lens of the SoundCloud era, is just as, if not more, prominent. And for the sake of our new series, I felt the need to highlight what is arguably the best full-length underground hip-hop project from this year, a year so chock full of essential releases. Among the aforementioned associates of Members Only, there was one in particular that came through with the project that should come to serve as the signature release of the group from a quality standpoint, and one that defines an entire era of hip-hop in the same way that the Carter II defines the bling era of the 2000s. If it isn't obvious enough already, for the first episode of the new Essentials, we're taking a look back at August 2017's Boy Who Cried Wolf by Wifisfuneral. I'm Bill with UVC, and let's get into it. Like previously mentioned, XXXTentacion was building a sizable reputation within the local hip-hop scene in Florida, primarily through his music, but also through his boisterous activities outside of his art that eventually got him locked up during his following breakthrough. Though these actions clouded some aspects of his music, they at least brought a high level of exposure to the rest of his contemporaries that were just as responsible for creating the era that we know today. And the outstanding part about all of this that I feel like we don't mention enough is that each artist who benefited from X's breakthrough did so in their own unique approaches to the bass sound that had been established. Ski Mask the Slump God took an entertaining avenue with his rise, incorporating elements from late 90s icons like Timbaland and Missy Elliott, while Killstation focused more on perfecting that hard-hitting, screamo-infused blend of genres that no one had ever heard prior to their rise. But in between those two was Wifisfuneral, a talent who decided to take a route more centered around proving that this scene was more than just goofy acts imitating the equally goofy acts of a past time in an ignorant fashion, or artists who only knew how to scream into a microphone to get hits. He was on a mission to prove that the old heads had someone to root for if they just paid enough attention. He wanted to show that true skill, as they put it, was just as present in these young minds as it was in any other rapper from 20 years ago. And with Boy Who Cried Wolf, he would indeed do just that and plenty more. To put it simply, Boy Who Cried Wolf is as close to perfection as any other album released under the SoundCloud rap label in 2017 as we would get. That aforementioned sense of skill is expertly communicated by Wi-Fi through a plethora of aspects on nearly every song in the track listing. That mission he was on can be felt through each and every verse that he spits, and it helps that he was doing so while flaunting that skill through his technical prowess in full. That brings us to the first of many facets that prove why this album is a classic waiting to happen. Wi-Fi was able to come through with an unprecedented level of technique unmatched by nearly any of his contemporaries, with the exception of Ski Mask and a few others. His mission was manifested in the fact that he knew he could flow as well as anyone else rapping at the time, and it didn't need to be showcased in a super fast, spiritual, lyrical miracle way either. Rather, Wi-Fi exemplifies his technical ability throughout the album by taking the main appeal of his subsection of hip-hop, its catchiness, and applied it to his delivery directly. It might sound weird to say that his flow is catchy, but I swear this is how it comes off when listening to the album, and it has everything to do with Wi-Fi's heightened knowledge of how to effectively ride a beat. You don't have to go very far to see this approach being clearly translated. Take the first verse off of the intro track Tic Tac, and just think for a second why your head is uncontrollably nodding to this tight and controlled offering. Wi-Fi is practically glued to the beat when he flows, and it creates a level of correspondence that basically gives the listener no choice but to feel that same sense of control and tightness that is being audibly translated.
Ride with the mop, homie floating on 2 Percocets. Pack Molly Tic Tac, make me sweat. Cut a fuck nigga in the face on my dick. 2 phones on my hip, I don't know who
can't tell me that his capacity to flow this well over not just this beat, but the 14 that follow, is not reminiscent of some of hip-hop's most technically proficient MCs in its entire history. The way he commands beats as consistently as he does on this album reminds me of some of the same elements that Outkast brought on Aquemini, or what Doom was doing on some of his early solo releases like Operation Doomsday. And I promise that I am not taking things too far when I make these comparisons, as not only are they just obvious enough with a bit of heightened consideration, but Wi-Fi himself has repeatedly made it clear that he is a true student of the game, at least in the way that some old heads might expect, in multiple interviews and statements alike.
MF Doom, come on, you've heard that that album with him and Madlib? From start to finish, you can't complain about his bars. He's so out the box, and he inspired so many like artists now that are like in this whole lyrical shit. People like Earl, you know what I mean? He influenced Tyler in his early career. Same way how people look at Biggie as a king, I just look at Doom in a better light.
So it is no surprise that someone with as much knowledge as him regarding how to traditionally make an effective hip-hop song would come through with 15 straight tracks of undeniably pure hip-hop. And I think that we will all come around to realize this as time moves forward. But even with Wi-Fi's mission and corresponding methodology being so vivid and calculated, it wouldn't have been possible if he didn't have ideal production backing up his vision. Producers throughout this era varied in their approaches in a manner that was anything but subtle. Though most took inspiration from similar sources like Metro Boomin and Lex Luger, among many others, the most notable producers in this scene made sure to craft their own niche that often worked best with their closest and most common contemporaries. Whether it was Ronnie J, Captain Crunch, or the seemingly endless cast of talent that passed around beats at this time, each producer came through with their own unique variations on what trap had come to be known up to that point. That sentiment rings especially true in the case of Chris Dinero, who produced a great deal of this project and was pretty much Wi-Fi's closest associate as far as production was concerned at this time. Dinero's beatmaking was equally direct and formidable, focusing on unpunctured and reversed audio loops over drums that thrive in their simplicity. These instrumentals for the most part follow the similar structure in how they build up tension towards the inevitable resolution that is Wi-Fi's verse itself. They slowly creep up on the listener, adding more and more layers until that divine 808 kicks in, and things really all start to come together. Dinero might have been the best at accomplishing this sense of forbiddenness at this time, and it's a notion that is subtle enough to work as its own little theme throughout the album. We're going to get to a point where once this sound becomes rich enough in its age, production methods reminiscent of it will have us saying, man, that was some Boy Who Cried Wolf Chris Dinero type shit. Seldom producers can lay claim to something like that, but Dinero's efforts truly warrant this claim just by how efficacious each track ended up turning out. And honestly, just the sound of these beats alone is enough to prove how top tier this production is.
Yeah. Ay, boy who cried wolf. Yeah. Just when they thought shit was sweet, huh? Hey.
In a period of time that saw producers doing everything they could to blow out speakers with their 808s, the low end on this album is completely under control and elusive in its nature. It's still fat as ever, but the way it blends into the rest of the beat is far more faint than any other producers were doing at the time, and it works so well given what this album was meant to convey from a sonic perspective. Pair that with some of the most crisp snares and head-nodding rhythms that could ever be found around this time, and you get a full-length experience that actually blossoms in its repetitiveness rather than suffering from it.
Hey, this shit. Hey, what am I saying? Like, what am I saying? In my head. What am I saying? This little voice. Hey, yeah. Man, like hit it with it one time. Man, like hit it with it one time.
Again, It's a marvel that De Niro was able to accomplish this given the fact that the term repetitive at the time was arguably the biggest area of criticism for rappers and producers alike in this scene. Moving away from these intensely technical aspects of why this album works so well and looking at the songs from a standard viewpoint, we can see that the essence of what made this sound what it was at the time is found in every second of the project's runtime. Because at this time, we all know that lyrics took a backseat to that visceral feeling that young audiences so desired on every track. Playlist culture was beginning to take shape around this time, and people simply did not care about what was being said as much as how it made them feel. Boy Who Cried Wolf epitomizes this notion by doing just that, leaving the lyrical themes at a basic level and letting the music do its work. And I think a common misconception among critics, professional or not, when taking note of projects that best utilize this outlook is that it wasn't just the instrumentals that solely grasp the audience in the way that they think. Rather, the best songs and projects in this liking relied on a perfect synergy between the particular way a rapper performed over these instrumentals despite their lyrical deficiencies. It is because of this fact that lyrics could even take a backseat in the first place. And while this sentiment certainly found its way into nearly every track that came out during this period, no one manifested its biggest upsides quite like Wi-Fi did for the entirety of this album. When you listen to an album like this, you really aren't listening for the lyrics as much as you're yearning for that sonic feeling that could only be captured through music like this. That perfect mix of catchiness and intensity with bouts of smooth breaks and passages. While other artists at this time were trying to push one specific sound in an extremely emphasized direction, Wi-Fi was able to utilize this synergy to encapsulate everything about the genre he had helped to define at that very time. This is not just found within the music itself either. Just look at the cast of features on the album. A wide variety of Wi-Fi's contemporaries, whether for members only or not, found themselves not sacrificing a single moment of quality in their moment to shine. From some of the year's most established acts like Kid Trunks and Fat Nick to then up-and-comers like Chapo, these features are just another example of how this album encapsulated all that the year of 2017 had to offer.
50 pints of white with ball like 50 glass, sound like 20 times, peeing down your block with that red rock. But we got like half a brick, that's a straight truck. Made 100,000 in the track spot, but I made like 20 off this pot, 100 off a lick. Did it alone, I done spent like 80 taking trips.
Because of their quality contributions, they were able to collectively come together under Wi-Fi's vision to create a defining moment in their scene's history. But this album really means more than just that. Not only is this album one of 2017's best hip-hop releases, but it practically defines an entire era of hip-hop as a whole, and certainly what it meant to be a part of it during that year in particular. And I know I've made that point multiple times now, but it bears repeating solely for the fact that no one is really bringing it up quite yet. For a tag like defining to stick, it needs to be emphasized to its fullest degree. People need to start realizing what this album means and our reflections on this era, reflections that have up to this point been shrouded in aspects outside of the music for obvious reasons. But as the years move forward and our hindsight steadily increases, I believe that the music itself will become the focal point of this period once again. And when that time inevitably comes, there can only be one album that truly defines the year 2017, the underground rap scene at the time, and the career of the artist in question. I know that Boy Who Cried Wolf is a classic, and it won't be long before so many others come to that exact same realization. And that is that. Thank you all so much for tuning into this new series that we're introducing for the foreseeable future. And I think you all know just by how much fun I had writing this episode, how excited I am to continue it. While we have plenty of albums in mind to reflect on for further episodes, we would love to hear which albums you guys think are classics waiting to happen that you would like to see covered in this series. So hit the comment section to give us your suggestions and requests, and they just might be the subject of a future episode. As always, you can find me on social media right here, and Eddie, who continues to pop off on editing these videos, right here as well. And of course, always hit UVC's socials for daily articles on the latest that the underground scene has to offer. Make sure you guys are liking and subscribing and all that, and we so appreciate the support every single time you tune in. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see y'all soon.